Good evening, or whatever it is, wherever you're at, morning, afternoon. I'm going to talk about 15.4 on this video, the independent agencies. In class, we talked about the federal bureaucracy as a whole, the cabinet, the executive office of the president, but we didn't really have any discussion. And to kind of close this up, have discussion about independent agencies, those that operate outside of the cabinet departments. They're independent for various reasons, as they were created, and there's really a question as to really whether they are truly independent or not. So you're looking at, again, 15.4 in your notes. They operate these independent agencies, is like, for example, NASA or the Social Security Administration, both of which you might be familiar with. Social Security, if you work or your parents work or your guardians or your aunt and uncle, they pay taxes to Social Security. In theory, getting that money back. NASA, the National Aerospace Association, that is another independent agency. Why are they independent is the question then. They don't fit necessarily into any specific department. So, for example, the General Services Administration were responsible for housekeeping, maintaining public buildings, supplies of the federal government, et cetera. That they don't necessarily fit in any department, so they're independent. They might be independent. Another reason is to protect them from the influence of parties and political pressures. An example of this would be Social Security, even though there's a lot of politicking with Social Security. But in theory, it's supposed to be something you pay into. And you get a statement for Social Security, get that money back, or get a payout when you retire. The FEC, the Federal Reserve Board, the Federal Reserve in general, they're setting the monetary policy as opposed to be an independent, nonpartisan, non-political operation. But they are still subject to budgetary constraints and changes to the law, even though they're quote unquote independent. Sometimes it just happens by accident, by happenstance, or because of a particular sensitive nature of the function of the organization, such as the CIA, the Central Intelligence Administration. They have, the sensitive nature of their function requires them to be independent. So independent executive, so that you could categorize these into various subgroups, buckets, however you want to call it. I think the book refers to it as, if you look at 15.4, as independent executive agencies, and they refer to them, I'm trying to see here, as, it's really a catch-all. So they refer to them as independent executive agencies, independent regulatory commissions, and government corporations. So independent executive agencies then are under the executive branch. Most non-cabinet agencies fall under this. So, for example, NASA, the Office of Personnel Management, Selective Service, that's where you are, the management of selecting people for the military if that becomes necessary. Office of Personnel Management, kind of what it sounds like. They focus on talent and human resources for the federal government. Regulatory, not necessarily under presidential control because they want them to be more independent, monitoring and policing aspects of the economy. For example, the Securities Exchange Commission, the Fed, that sets the monetary policy, Federal Communications Commission. Again, the Security Exchange Commission, I told you, I think I mentioned this class, they oversee the stock market. Federal Communications Commission oversees, radio and television. So these are not necessarily directly under the presidential thumb for a reason. They want them to be independent. And then you've got certain government corporations, like the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, Tennessee Valley Authority, the United States Postal Service. These operate supposedly, in theory, on their own. The banks would pay Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation to operate and insure people's deposits. You pay for the USPS, although that has to be heavily subsidized because lately, because of the fall in mail to the electronic communication, that they've been operating at a loss. So the question is, are they truly independent? I mean, you still have a presidential, congressional influence over these organizations. So calling them independent, in some ways, it could be considered a misnomer. I mean, they're independent in name and in function, but I mean, there's influence from the president, there's influence from the cabinet, there's influence from the executive office of the president, there's influence from Congress. So there's still influence, even though they remain independent.